Let's talk herd. Hi, Kira. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm so
Yeah.
excited to chat and get to meet you and connect in this way.
Yeah, it's so nice to meet kindred spirits with horses. So I was wondering how you got into horses in the first place.
Um, I think they lived in my imagination before they lived in my reality. I think
Wow.
maybe that's how it is for a lot of little girls, it seems.
Mm.
And I was lucky enough to grow up on a little farm, just like 5 acres with goats and chickens and a garden. And I kind of cycled through animals that I wanted to be. Like, it wasn't like I admired them. It was like I wanted to be that creature. Like, I wanted the shapeshift to be real. I was like, I don't want to be a human. I want to be a
Yeah.
four-legged. Um, and so first it was cats, and then it was goats, and then it was horses. And once it hit horses, that was it. There wasn't any
Yeah.
going back. And so I was the kid who like cantered around on the schoolyard doing mock dressage tests and I'm sure looking ridiculous, but being completely oblivious to what that looked like to everybody else.
Yeah.
And making jump courses in the front yard and getting my little brother to like run along with me. And so,
Yeah, that's all very familiar.
right. And so always wanting horses, but they really came through in the imagination first. And I don't know
Yeah.
why that came forward as the first thing to tell, but um, and then they kind of came through into real life through riding lessons.
Mm. Yeah.
And the once a week point of contact, and my dad would take me to country fairs and to feed these horses up the road.
Mm.
That like that awe of like
Yeah.
offering the handful of grass and waiting for this giant being to like come down and
Yeah.
bless you with its breath. Um,
Yeah.
and then as I got a bit older, we moved off the farm and to a small town called Merrickville in Ontario in Canada.
Right.
And I could ride my bike to barns. And so
Okay.
the last couple of years of grade school and into high school, like I was a barn rat. So apprenticed with trainers and really would do anything and everything to just be there. And, I slept at home, but that was about it.
Yeah.
And that was the world I wanted to live in, and um, did a bunch of train like big apprenticeships with trainers. Kind of did the show world, bought a mare
Mm.
when I was 17. Um, Worked in Scotland for a trainer for a bit. Worked
Wow. Where
in
was
in
that?
in the Borders.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was like 21. So it kind of opened the doors of the world to me. Like in a
Yeah.
way, it was this really insular pocket of like dedication and focus, but at the same
Mm.
time, it kind of also um, cracked open the world a bit. And
Yeah.
I think as everyone does, I kind of stepped away and came back a couple of times because
Mm.
that world of conventional training is hard on
So
its horses, and
true.
it's hard on its people.
Mm.
Um,
Absolutely.
and so there was moments where I would kind of come and go, um, and then got into the healing side of things, and so was out of horses for a while, and then ended up with a 2,000 pound Percheron rescue mare who was pretty feral with turned up feet and a surprise
Mm.
filly gestating in her belly that I didn't know
Oh, wow.
about. And so that was kind of my rewilding of how I thought one should be with horses.
Oh, yeah. That's
Um,
amazing.
and from there got into equine guided learning of just kind of being with them on the ground and being like, what is happening in reciprocity in between us
Yeah.
instead of what can we do together.
Yeah.
Um, but
What would you
always, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask what your main shift you would say in your mind towards them was
At
over
that
that.
time, I think that I had like, because I was raised in the arts, um, like with very artistic parents, um, and there was always that sense that there was a little bit more there than what was presented on the surface.
Mm.
And I grew up reading all those mythical,
Yeah.
fiction book stories of like the real magic in the connection. And in the sport horse world, that doesn't get talked about.
No.
It's not there, right?
Yeah.
And so part of that shift was like, I want to explore that realm. And so that's sort of why I think I was led in that direction,
Mm.
to the equine guided learning part of things, and the metaphor, and sort of courting the myth of what horses bring alive in your
Yeah.
own journey.
It is. It's such a powerful shift, isn't it? And so you were doing, what was the main thing that you did when you were training? Showing, or did you do?
I did like, I ended up taking a lot of the greener horses and kind
Yeah.
of bringing them along. I did a little bit of jumping and eventing, but then kind of went into classical dressage,
Mm.
in that direction, which is a whole other
Yeah.
rabbit hole of like
Yeah.
nuance and feeling and precision, and
Yeah.
that whole felt language of
Mm.
of like where this becomes a word between you,
Yeah.
or a blink
Yeah.
changes, and those levels of precision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really, yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did the same kind of journey, I would say, like into dressage. And then, so it's kind of complicated, isn't it, when you move away from that, because it's almost like you feel you lose that level of physical connection. But then it's so difficult to make that be fully reciprocal.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know if do you still ride, or have you
Yeah, well, I
moved
think
up?
part of what I noticed in that is like horses are meant to move as
Mm,
a species, as a being, and part of what kind of kept leading me beyond the equine guided learning world of like, let's put them in a round pen and examine this
yeah,
like weird kind of artificial microcosm. It's like making a petri dish of something that's meant to be
yeah.
moving and flowing, and you can take people who don't know about horses and put them in there, and they have beautiful experiences.
Mm,
Um, but for me and who I was at the time, there was just so much anxiety in my physiology of
mm,
like trying to like hold these beings that are meant to be dynamic and fluid and moving
mm,
energy all the time in this like little container, so that we could then like make notes from the sidelines about
yeah,
what was happening.
yeah. That's really interesting.
Um, and I felt like a bit of a failure for a long time, because I couldn't
Mm,
like do the work like
yeah.
in the way that it was being given to me at the time.
Is that like equine communication, equine therapy kind of?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
just kind of, I mean, this would have been like 2009, I think
right.
2010, when I did
Yeah,
that specific
yeah,
training, and I was like, I don't know, I think this is a piece, but I
yeah. It's not
don't
the
think
whole.
it's there yet. So
Yeah. So how did it develop from there?
well, I moved across the country, from like Ontario and sort of east of the middle of Canada to the west coast, um, and wasn't able to bring my horses with me because that just felt crazy. Um, and
It's a
and
huge
it's a
country.
huge continent. Like,
Uh,
I barely got my own self across, you know. And so I, yeah, was out of horses for a little while again, and just kind of in the arts, and being my own self for a while. And then I ended up missing riding, like missing that movement and that like literacy of what my body knew in terms of like how to communicate with these beings. And so I leased a jumper mare from a teenager, and the 1 day a week that I got to ride. And I kept kind of changing around on different horses. She had a couple of them, and she was like, "You can ride whoever. Everyone you ride feels better after. Like just ride my horses." And so I started riding this big 16 two-hand Belgian like draft cross jumper gelding, and he had a bit of a reputation as having a decent buck in him. Sometimes he would invent 6-foot jumps that were not there and just have at it.
Yeah.
And she had a fall off him and got quite injured, and her parents were like, "No more, like this horse has got to go." And so I made a joking offer on him. They were going to take him to auction, and I was like, "Well, I'll give you $1,000 for him." And they were like, "Sure." And so when I said like that big draft horse mare rewilded my education, like he was the next rewilder of like all the ways that I thought we should ride horse and be with ridden horses. He wouldn't tolerate any of it. He was done with that.
Yeah.
So we went out into the woods and we hand walked and we meandered, and I took him out bareback with just a halter and cantered him around the outside of baseball diamonds because it was like the only good footing that I could find, and like rode him downtown, and just took him to coffee shops. Like I remember we were behind the community center and there was like a hang glider coming down, and this little girl who's like, "Can I pet him?" And I'm like, "Not now, honey. Like it's not the time."
Wow.
And so we really just tried to do everything that he'd never done. I was like, get him out of a ring, show him all of the strange ways that humans can be wonderful and innovative and creative and joyful. And then he became my lesson horse for 6-year-olds, which if you had heard his reputation when I first took him on, you'd be like, that's crazy.
No way. Yeah.
But he was happy. And as long as he was happy, then he was safe.
Exactly.
And so that kind of changed everything about how do you ride, and how do we teach riders to be riders if our goal is joy?
Yeah.
Right? And 6-year-olds are so much better at that.
Yeah.
Than grown-ups. It's so fast, right? All you need is the sentence and they're like, and sometimes us grown-ups need a little bit more to find them. So went really deep into the kid work with that horse in particular. Wow.
And they have a way, don't they, of just when they feel a young person close by, they just kind of go that really safe way where they soften in some way.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And it's like, because we know them so well, it's like we know how big that gift is.
Yeah, exactly.
But the person on their back's like, this is just how it is. And you're like, that's exactly how it has to be.
Exactly. I think that's a real indication as well as to how they really know. Like they really are in control of themselves. It's not just random and it's not unpredictable. It's like they know what they're doing with their body. Yeah. And it's sometimes I think it's hard for us to really truly believe that sometimes.
Right. And is it like that legacy of like separation that makes us think that we are the only ones who can think and feel in that way? Whereas the horses are like, I've been this universe this whole time. And
it's so
I've been just waiting for you to walk through the door.
And that comes through all animals. I think all animals have that sort of divine nature. I mean, just as we do, but I think for us it's harder for us sometimes to get away from our ego. And but it really is the end. I always think it's the individuals that each horse is bringing us a particular gift. So it's like there's no rules, You can't say you should do this or you should do that. That's for us personally, individually, to understand and to bring something
Yeah.
about. So we just, that's our job to listen to that, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I used to kind of point out, like, whenever someone swings onto a horse for the first time, this is a gift that they're giving us.
So true. Yeah.
Because we
So
have all
true.
of these, almost like these preconceived notions that that's what horses are for.
Yes. So true.
And I've kind of
Yeah.
been like asking myself this question in the last couple of years, because I've stepped away from actively teaching. Like I was like, for 12 years, it was like running with what this gelding had shown me, and like, let's blow it up and make it big and like go and make it beautiful. And then I've stepped away from that, and then I closed. I mean, we can get into the story, but I've closed my physical school and have kind of, my heart's just small again. I just have two mares now, and I've had the opportunity to kind of just ask myself and them, like, what are we for now? Like,
Yeah.
if we're not
Yeah.
showing up to give people these experiences
Yeah.
that fits this, like, well, I want a riding lesson,
The purpose.
which then
yeah.
means we have to deliver this thing. And if we step out of that, then what does that
Oh my God, yeah. That's so where I am and have been.
well,
for
tell me more
now.
about that edge of exploration for you.
Oh gosh. I mean, at the moment we're just I'd say we started that probably in 2017 when we moved here, because the herd, I just decided, I won't go super deep into it because I've talked about that in the other podcast, but basically we just decided to really listen to each other. And that was the only kind of guidance we had. But as I've been going along that, I've been going more into my own sort of spiritual release, I suppose, like becoming more and more just wanting to kind of absolve myself from my ego. So that kind of has involved giving away my purpose entirely and I wouldn't say that I'm religious, so it's difficult because the terms that you use have a lot of connotations. It's just like really about giving to the divine and just saying, I'm here, my purpose is to be of use, in any way that I can be. So that's kind of brought us to this place where we're a little bit in this limbo kind of thing. Like the herd have a great life. They're super happy. They do, they go where they like, and they've got quite a big terrain. We're really lucky with that. Well, fortunate to have, and in a way they attracted that because I said to them, you've got to dream of your ideal place, and that it kind of came about. But yeah, we're just in this place right now of, like, I almost feel like what I'm being asked to do is elsewhere at the moment, other things, and I do have these dreams of, my dream is to somehow find that way, like you were saying about the movement, to be able to move together. And I did for a little while. I was just doing that with the one mare who is like a real soul horse, and I had her from young, and we didn't do any real force, like kind of real conventional training. Like we kind of gave up on that very early because she, a bit like your boy, she was like, she cannot even be, she's not even, I mean, she's had, like, we've had some amazing experiences, like loading in the trailer and getting over these panic attacks she would have and being really close. But also, on the other hand, she really doesn't like being contained in any way. So we kind of come and go with it. But really, the times that I've got on her back, she's been completely equipment free, just loose in the herd. And she comes and says, she's came and said to me, you can get on now. But then I sort of double, like I've second guessed that too. Like, is that a since, especially this whole thing of letting my purpose, just be completely given to me from guidance and I think we do that all the way along. Like, it's not like I wasn't doing that then, but it's like I think you're more and more able to let go of what you think is, what it should be.
Mm-hmm.
So we've really not done that for a long time. And then I judge myself, like you were saying, I'm like, oh, it's just because you're scared and you're not willing to just, because one time she just strode out of the barn and we did a couple of times she walked in with the herd and it was fine. It felt fine. But then I just had this feeling like I'm not ready. I'm not ready as a human being to just be completely trusting of what, that she is going to be able to understand and the feelings, because I've got no way of, controlling her essentially. It's not about control. And so maybe if I was like a better person, like a more fearless, more connect, I don't know, more something, I would be able to trust better and just allow, and we would be, galloping around the property and all those wonderful things. But it just kind of petered out, and I've just got to say, well, I'm just got to follow. I've just got to follow what, just that guidance is basically based on what can I give? Where can I be that is of most value to others? And at the moment it's more for humans in my life and more about forgiveness and, you know, these kind of helping people more than it is really the horses. But I think they will come back in, I
Yeah.
hope.
Oh, thank you for sharing all of that. It feels like, I mean, there's this funny pressure that we put on it, like that we have to be doing all of these things. And I mean, because I've asked myself that same question so many times in the last couple of years. Like, do I need to have horses? Why do I have horses? Like, I've clung so hard to like this, the
Yeah.
final two that are still,
Yeah.
and I think they're just like the backdrop of my life. Like,
Yeah.
and I say just like not in a dismissive way, but like I think that's just
Yeah.
they're holding something down, or they're dreaming something for me, or
That's so
they're,
true. Yeah.
and there's so many days where I'm like, I live on the property with my horses and they're right there, and I
Mm,
don't always even do anything with them every
yeah.
day, but I know that they're there.
Yeah. Oh no, I
And
really agree with that. Yeah. Like just the other day, I'd had this similar kind of, because I spend a lot of time looking after 8 horses, and
yeah,
I'm thinking, and I don't do, I'm not sort of exploiting them or even, there's no, but then I just realized that's the energetic structure, they are creating or being or, you know, emanating something
yeah.
that's really important. And it's not maybe even just the way that they have choice and the way that we have this love between us. It doesn't matter, but it's something really strong. So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. I think it's very
Well,
important.
and that makes me think of two things. I heard Zach Bush say something in a
Oh,
podcast
yeah.
interview about whale song and how it's believed in indigenous story that their vocalizations actually hold the planet Earth
Yes.
together, like it's this web that just
Yeah.
um and whether we go science with that or like just story it down into the mythic imagination, but it also, like, there was this one time when like quite a few years ago, I climbed this really big cedar tree above the horse field, like at an old property. and it was winter time, and so I could see all the tracks and the paths that they'd made in the
Oh,
snow
wow.
over a
Yeah.
couple of acres from like a bird's eye view. So I was
Yeah.
suddenly had this viewpoint opened up to me that I hadn't seen, and it was like perfectly, it wasn't like a grid, because that's what we
Yeah.
do. That's not how they move, like they
Yeah.
meander. But it was like every part of the land that they had access to had been visited. Like there were hoof prints, like quite regularly through the space. And to me on the ground, it just looked like they had their few trails from like the hay
Hmm.
bags to the water to the gate to the. But once I got up high, I could see that it really was.
That's
It was a
amazing.
pattern.
Yeah, like sacred geometry, it makes me think of like,
Yeah.
yeah, wow.
And it's
Yeah.
it's funny, we tend to like dismiss these things sometimes,
Mm.
or we put too much faith in them. Um, and I try to like find a middle ground where I'm just like, can we just marvel in the beauty and the meaning of
Yeah.
that without knowing why or how or.
Yeah, there's so much like that, I really think, that we don't we do know on some level of ourselves, but we can't necessarily, even think about it or put it into words or, describe it, but it's there. And it's like, and you can act. It reminds me of I've been doing this art recently, and I do it on a digital tablet, but it's like a sort of expression of, like, if I do it for someone, then it'll be an expression of their soul or their being or their, and everything in it. I just know what has to be put there, and I don't always know why, but I just know, what it needs to be. And it's so beautiful always. Like, it's like, oh my God, that person is just so beautiful in themselves. And it's so balanced. And when you were talking about this, like, picture of the horses and where they go, it's kind of like that. Like, there's always a meaning for everything. And it always balances and it's always so beautiful. But we don't really know at a kind of conscious level
Yeah.
what it means always.
Yeah.
I mean, some things will come through and, but in a way it's like almost an unfolding or a becoming or because sometimes with the paintings, someone will actually use them for, meditation or for, it actually helps them to change in themselves. So I think
Mm.
we just can't know really, like we
Yeah.
can't always know what our place is or what, because that made me think the other day that the parts of ourselves that are really divine, we don't even like know on an ego level, because our ego is the sort of part of us that knows about ourselves, knows about stuff. So, like, for example, if somebody gave somebody a miracle, like, created a healing miracle for them or something,
Mm-hmm.
often they don't even feel what's happening. Like, they're not even, it's just a touch. So it's like that part of us that we aren't aware of on the ego level is like the important bit. It's like the bit that connects us to others, really. So that's what that's what I'm kind of really fascinated with at the moment. Like,
Mm.
fascination's the right word, but like just wanting to go there more, wanting to be that more.
And
So
then it's almost like are we being led toward a different way of perceiving
exactly, yeah.
time and our like, because I feel like, and it was funny us trying to like show up in the same space for this
Yeah.
call, like we were
Yeah.
thwarted by ladybugs, and then there was a time change, and like it it feels like human time is like escalating in this like
Yeah.
ridiculous,
So
I don't know
true.
even what's fueling it. Like it
Mm,
almost feels like it's like some pathological force that's like
yeah.
and it's almost like it's unstoppable, but it's not actually what life is adhering to,
Yeah,
like the
it
rest
doesn't
of life.
even
So
exist.
if we get out into nature and if we get into like true conversations with other humans, and if we like get into our dreams and get into like, how long does it take for the birch sap to start running in the trees
Mm.
outside my house, which has nothing to do with the Gregorian calendar. It has to do with sunlight and freeze temperatures. Like, that's a whole other thing. And I feel like we're kind of being asked, like, where are we putting our allegiance? Is it in this crazy, separated, ungrounded growth curve, or is it, in the moment that we climb the tree and can see the pattern just for a moment, because we
Mm.
can't stay there, we'd know too much.
Yeah. And I think it totally, like, we can reset all the time. Like when you do those things and you're with those things, like the trees and the, you really let go in your mind of that time construct. It's like you reset, you rebalance, and you like realize, oh my God, it really doesn't matter. Like none of that matters.
Yeah.
If I go much slower or take my time, or everything's going to fit around me. It's not that I need to fit myself around that. So it's like so powerful to be able to do that, to just be able to and I think your life then does start to become more fluid. All those rigid things that you thought you were kind of beholden to
Mm-hmm.
just shift. And it's like they were never really real in the first place. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Oh, and that's such a beautiful reminder for me, because I'm like, I have to launch this thing and I have to do this and I
Yeah.
have to. And I bumped into, I had one of those serendipitous, like, stranger encounters a couple of years ago while I was traveling. And he's like, who invented should? Like, we have to do away with the
Mm,
shoulds.
yeah,
Everything
so
you should
true.
do, just stop it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Oh
And
my
it's
God.
hard. Like, the
Yeah,
mind is so good at imposing.
yeah,
And that's this kind of time. It's that vertical acceleration. How do we
absolutely.
how do we like live in a world that adheres to this, yet
Yeah.
also honor
And I
the
feel,
way the
yeah,
river actually wants to?
yeah. I feel like that is really, that's been my task for the last, or my kind of almost inspiration the last
Mm.
sort of few years, especially, is just completely unpicking myself from that kind of agenda based thing of like, and just like waiting for guidance kind of thing.
Mm.
And it's like, then it becomes more that you just go with this flow. Like it's not so much it's not so much um instructed by your thoughts. It's more just a kind of feeling for where you're meant to be, and what, and it's like different things open up, like things that you would never really have been doing, and it just feels right, and you're like, and then it just kind of makes sense, and it kind of creates a different reality. But
Mm.
it comes from being able to, in your mind, sort of see things differently. Just that's the root of it, really, just being able to say, I could see this differently. And then like it starts to soften your kind of thought patterns about things, I suppose.
Well, then
So
that's
yeah.
what opens the wormhole. And then you're
Yeah.
like, whoosh.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So powerful. Yeah. So what, I suppose we should talk about your work, because that does sound really interesting that you were doing with the kids.
Yeah. Um, well, and it's funny to say, let's talk about my work, because like, a lot of, I feel like there's that dividing line, like what
Mm.
was and then what is
Yeah.
becoming. So we can kind of dance on both sides. Um, seems to be how it is right now, is
Mm.
the living in both worlds at once. Um, so for about 12 years, I went really deep into following the
Mm.
work that big gelding handed me, really. which was how do we have joy be our guiding principle and delight. And when I was growing up and taking riding lessons and being an apprentice trainer and all of those learning situations, there was a lot of lessons that made me cry and a lot of lessons that kids cry. And there was so
Mm.
much rhetoric in the model of like, I shout, you do, that's how we progress.
Yeah.
And so what I wanted to bring was how do we dance this? Like, how do we have this be, yes, I'm giving instructions, but I want to be the translator and the guide to this
Mm.
like magical world of how to move with a horse. And so that kind of turned into years of just following that through line. And people would offer me horses that, you know, either needed physical rehab or uh, the ability to let themselves become in a new way, and share their actual gifts instead of shut them down.
Yeah.
And so between following those horses and the students who came to me, I worked with a lot of folk on the autism spectrum for years and years as well. And so there was that like deeply therapeutic part woven in. How do we
Mm.
stabilize the nervous system? How do we
Yeah.
let what the person loves blossom out into the space
Mm.
instead of get shut down? That whole leave your feelings at the gate
Yeah.
mentality. I was like, I want to see who they are because that's going to make their horse feel them. And that's going to make their, you know, them feel their horse. Um, and then ended up having the chance to lease a really beautiful facility that I kind of jokingly
Mm.
called the temple to the idea of the horse. And that it was
Yeah.
like those beautiful box stalls with the bars and the brand new
Mm.
fresh poured concrete, like hardly been pooped upon. Like
Wow.
it was like this beautiful
Yeah.
idea. And then I ended up taking out a bunch of the dividers between the stalls and just using them as run-in shelters and
Mm.
kind of modified it to make it work for how
Yeah.
horses actually wanted to live. Um, and just kind of went for it and ran full-time programming out of this like temple. It was gorgeous. And so had between 8 and 10 horses. Would do like 12 weeks of summer camps
Yeah.
that families would plan their vacations around. Um, and
So how
again,
would it, say you were going to work with someone with a horse, what would be the structure of it? Like, how did you bring that into, like, how did you marry training and, those things and riding and the kind of more spiritual nature?
I kind of snuck the spiritual parts in sideways,
Yeah.
right? And so I called it riding lessons and relationship based
Yeah.
horsemanship. It was very practical. I had to call it something that people would recognize. And then
Mm.
underneath that, I was kind of able to, and so the first thing we would do always for every lesson, it was like something that was integrated into the paid teaching time, whether you could walk, trot, canter and jump a little course, or if it was your first time, is we would all go out and meet the herd together and talk about body language and how are they feeling and how do we know and what do we feel when we're here, and if we act this way with our bodies, how do our horses respond? And so from the very first moments we have that check in and that idea that it's like it's a back and a forth, and like how we are and how we stand and how we breathe is part of the language,
Mm.
and it's part of the experience, like from the very first moment. It's not something that starts once you like swing your leg over this. And then it was like riding instruction, and that I did create riders. I
Mm.
did, you know, train horses. um but because it was like really small groups and usually one-on-one, um I could like watch the horse and the horse would tell me what the rider needed to,
Mm.
and I could look at the rider's body and I could see how the horse was making them feel and then offer suggestions and
Yeah.
instructions. And a lot of Sally Swift's like riding with the
Mm.
bones stuff.
Yeah.
Um I was doing a lot of yoga practice with some really incredible practitioners, like really slow somatic practice.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like, and like
Mm.
tensegrity and like talking to the fascia and like
Mm.
moving the breath to different parts of the body. Um, until then, the two skeletons could flow together, right?
Yeah.
And then we would start adding in, if we add more movement, then this happens. If we add more energy, then this
Mm.
happens. Um, and we would go out of the ring a lot and work with whatever terrain I had. Like I would,
Mm.
I spent a lot of time cutting little trails through properties and
Mm.
up and down ditches and little turns, and just so that we could actually, one, it gets the horses out of a ring
Yeah.
and keeps their spirits alive,
Mm.
because they just can't go around in circles for
No.
that long. They just go brain dead, and then they're not there behind their eyes,
Mm.
and we can't have that. We need them to be alive,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So that was a really important part, was getting out into nature where they're just moving,
Mm.
right? And the horse can see where the trail is, so they don't need as much from the rider. The rider can relax, go, and flow and breathe and notice trees and birds and deer and bears, and like
Yeah.
we had a lot of wildlife around us, and then come back in the ring and practice a skill and then take it out into the world again.
Hmm.
And
That
so there
sounds
was that
great.
ebb and
Yeah. 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 It's such a sort of enigma in a way, the whole thing. Because like for my the way that I experienced it, it would be it could feel amazing to be so aware, and it always moved towards something that was more flowing and more connected, and but then somehow overall we were moving like just away from the whole training, the training relationship. And
mm-hmm.
that's what's and I think that you just can't take yourself out of the equation. It has to be like I think we get too much, or I suppose I had to talk for me personally, that it was always like, how can this thing that I'm doing relate to everyone? Like, what is it, like looking for these absolute truths of how to do things. And then I think you kind of realize that that's not maybe the role, like that we all have a very particular role here. And it's not necessarily like just finding these ways of, or techniques or methodologies for doing things, because that's where the horses seem to be sort of taking me anyway, like
Right,
away from training. And
right.
even though those kind of what you're describing is so beautiful and it's so productive, and I think, yeah, I think just different horses have different messages for,
100%.
because you can easily get into this, but horses really don't, if you give them the 100% choice, do you want to work with us? Do you want us to get on your back? You could say that they would always, or pretty much, 90% of this time not want to.
Yeah,
But then I just don't think you can say, or I can't, I mean, that might be my experience.
yeah.
But I think that's
Yeah,
for a reason, I think that's for a reason. I don't think it's necessarily true,
yeah.
because in the horse world, there's a very deep divide now, isn't there,
There
between
really,
non-riding people,
yeah,
and that riding is any form of riding and any form of training or containment is basically, wrong on some
yeah,
level. And then on the other side, you've got, varying degrees of control. And I think it's just, yeah, we can't do that. We can't impose anything on another sort of being, another because we're all very we've got a very particular purpose.
Mm-hmm. I will say to that though, and I mean, this is maybe how I justified it, or how I sold it to my 6-year-olds with all the good questions, right? Because
Yeah,
it's always the kids who are
yeah,
going to ask you, well, how do I know that Larkin wants me to get on his back today? He just wants to
yeah,
be wild and free,
yeah.
you know? And she's not wrong. Like, it's, and but sometimes I think about it like, I've seen movement heal horses'
Mm,
bodies, like horses who've come to
absolutely.
me who've been injured, and movement has
Yeah,
healed them
absolutely.
beyond anything veterinary science has said was possible. And low impact movement with small bodies on them. Like, let's be very precise. Like,
Yeah.
I wasn't putting anybody on them. I was treating them like porcelain because they were
Mm,
precious, right? But I mean, I've had horses that people said were never going to be sound who became sound with
mm,
small light riders and
mm.
frequent movement. And I don't know that if I just had this horse because I loved it, that I would have made the commitment to
Yeah,
actually being that consistent,
yeah.
right? And if we think about, and I'm not like justifying, I'm just like, this is part of what my practice has been, and what the horses who came to me have
Mm,
shown me, is that if they're meant to be moving every day over miles and miles, that's evolutionarily how they were
mm.
designed. I feel like I can't, well, I could walk enough steps to give them
Yeah,
enough movement with me walking
yeah.
beside. But I get tired. I only have so many hours in a day. I have to do this thing, which means I need to do some kind of work to
Mm,
make this part of the
yeah,
world work. And
yeah.
so how do we give them enough movement without joining them at some point? And this is like a conversation I'm having with, I have this black quarter horse mare named Jet, but sometimes I just call her the black mare because that's kind of who she's been in the background mythology of my horsey life. Um, and I'll take her for a hand walk because she comes out kind of grumpy, and she doesn't want to go, and she doesn't want to
Mm,
leave the herd, and she'd rather stop and twitch her ears and listen. And it's like she's moving through layers of feeling and separation and
mm,
pressure, and it's not very fun for the first little bit. And then her body sort of comes alive, and she does those big blowy snorts, and she starts striding out.
mm.
And then partway along, she kind of looks at me, and she's a quarter horse. Like, she's got this long genetic ancestry of being super practical. Like, I
Mm,
feel like this is a new lineage of horses that I'm just meeting. Like, I
yeah.
haven't done the quarter horse thing yet. So this is a new journey for me. And she's like, why are you still walking? Like, we could have been home already. Like,
Yeah.
why are you doing this way? And I'm like,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know, because I'm listening and you're listening, and you weren't ready and now you are. And like, what's the right moment? And what do I want? Like, what does my body need? And I think that we're really quick to pick the this way or that way. And
Oh,
I
so true.
always, it's
Yeah.
like the ways in the middle, and it looks
Yeah,
like a squiggle and a snake
absolutely.
and a river, and not like a line of division.
Yeah.
But that's kind of been my walk
Yeah.
in those nether regions between right and wrong lately.
Yeah, it so resonates. It's like I actually think I don't think it really matters in a certain sense what you do at all, like physically, in the physical
Right.
realm. I think it's all that, how to describe it, it's all that kind of energetic relationship. So it's really hard for us to get out, because I noticed that about riding in that world, that
Mm-hmm.
conventional world we were talking about, that
Yeah.
how utterly deeply routine based it. People will do, like, follow a routine down to the kind of last little physical thing that they do, like every day the
Yeah.
same. And so I think you have to go through a whole long process of like unpicking that and
Yeah.
just like entirely letting that
Yeah.
And then you go through this whole thing in your mind of letting a load of stuff go, like expectations and pressure and purpose, just what's it all for, and then feeling meaningless. And and then I think maybe you can come back to the place where it really doesn't, you could do anything in any moment.
Mm.
And it's just about the connection, it's just about the feeling between you. And I'm coming more and more to this thing that like how do you put it? Like the way that how you've healed your mind as
Mm.
such, that is your world. So, so for it, like to explain that a bit better, when I used to do dressage with my sister, and we were a bit like what you're describing. We did everything. So it was based on the biomechanics of the posture, like moving with like really that your seat and how your posture moves with the horse, and allowing that movement fully, and really getting away from the push and pull kind of
Mm-hmm.
dynamic. And it's such a beautiful thing. Like horses would just transform. I mean, horses that were just had no natural movement really would just move beautifully. And there was like this knowing at that time that you're creating something that just doesn't, they wouldn't have if they were just out in a field. And we used to be very much mental, like very attached to that
Mm-hmm.
sort of transformation, and that was the answer. And so if we saw horses that were just like living their lives in a field, they would always look really kind of unachieved somehow, like the way that they make. And that's what it makes me think of when you're saying like that, because it's kind of true that. But then, funnily enough, like now, my horses are those kind of like they've kind of become that in a way. Like they're not doing that training,
Mm-hmm.
and yet they've achieved a gracefulness that I think comes from my mind. Like, and it's going to sound a bit bizarre. And it's not just personal to me, because I don't think of it as being me. I think we're all together, like we're all a soul group, including the horses. So it's like we're all achieving this together. Like we're not, it's not me doing something with them. It's like all of us, we chose to kind of do this together, and we chose different roles, and all of the roles are equal. But it's like, as we let go of our limitations a bit, like I've let go of that whole thing of that you have to do a certain thing to make them a certain way. And then so now they just seem to have an unnatural grace that, I mean, yeah, they are out, they're never shut in ever, and they kind of have enough land, you could say. But essentially, I don't think it comes from that level. I think it comes from the spiritual level. So, like, the more that you heal your mind, is the simplest way to put it, then the more that just shows up physically. So it's like physical issues just kind of melt away because they only really existed in the mind. And I know it sounds a bit crazy, but then when it starts happening, you just start to kind of really see that it does happen that way. It works that way. Like every limit that we see outside of ourselves is somewhere, has its root in our mind.
Yeah. Well, then what's coming up is just the word emergent. It like
Mm,
that you've found a way to just be in whatever wants to happen next together.
mm,
And so then that lets kind of the mind of the world through that moment instead of your mind.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a really good way of putting that. Basically, absolving yourself of your ego, like because that's a bit like a kind of control over everything. because it just doesn't let us. It's like we're just not free when we've got that hold. It's like a hold over our mind. And I
Mm-hmm.
think if it's so strong, we just identify with it. We think that is our mind.
Yeah, we think it is us, like
Yeah,
that that is
exactly.
me, and I
Yeah.
have to protect it at all costs.
Yeah.
Like it's it, and
Yeah.
it's like that individuation, like that sort of
Yeah.
you're on top of the pyramid of your life.
Yeah, exactly.
And I
Exactly.
definitely war with that still. Like I'm I'm one of those like stranger prophets again. I was in a bookstore on Salt Spring Island, and someone walked through the door, and he's like, "Oh, I just hit my head on the tree out there, but I'm an Aries. I have to just hit my head on things until I can realize." And sometimes I think about that, and I'm an Aries as well. So
Oh,
sometimes I'm
me
like,
too.
"Yeah, you can just stop hitting your head on that thing and just let it be. Like you don't have to
That's
like,
funny.
hammer on it so hard. Like just."
That's so funny. Yeah, I
um,
tend to think of what I like myself as impatient because I'm an Aries. It's
yeah.
like,
Well, and so I'm living on this farm, and there's a bunch of a couple of rams here with like the big curled horns.
yeah.
And they're
Oh wow.
beautiful. And in the spring, last spring when they got shorn, they didn't recognize each other anymore, and so they started fighting. So they were
Oh
like,
my.
doing the and I've never seen it in real
Wow.
life, and it's serious.
It's loud as
Like
well, isn't
I
it?
think there's a reason for me. There's some medicine in that, like resonance of like, can you just not hit quite so hard and just let it be? That's still you.
Yeah.
Like even if it looks different,
Yeah.
like
Oh my God, that's an amazing analogy.
because
That's so
so,
funny.
sometimes I like to be like, oh, I found it. Like I'm in the moment. I've got it, and then that
Yeah.
it's still in me.
It's a big relief, I think, to just allow that you don't understand, like
Yeah.
that we don't really know anything and that we don't have to because like the knowledge is there and all we have to do is like be open to receiving it.
Yeah.
Like I think that's the root when you realize that you're not a big shift for me was like realizing that I didn't create myself. So like so therefore
Wait, what?
because I think we just sort of assume like when your ego's got that control over you, you sort of like that's what it tells you all the time that you created your. I mean, it's a funny way to put it, I know maybe, but we don't realize that we are not the source, like
Hmm.
of everything. And when you can see that the source is all around us and embracing us and that everything is there for us, like encouraging or offering us everything we need, then it's like you can move away from the lack of always thinking. Because I think that's the root a lot of the time of these struggles we have with our purpose and like what we're supposed to do. And I mean, that we don't maybe need to do anything, that we're just whole. If we could just sort of realize, even for a second, that we've got everything, that we're complete, that makes a huge difference, doesn't it? Because then you're not searching. You don't have to search constantly
Yeah.
for
Well, and then
something.
everywhere you are is where exactly where you're meant to be, and
Exactly.
sometimes I rail against that again. That like, but and what a beautiful release to let that,
Yeah.
even just to play with that edge of like, what if I just let that go?
Mm, exactly. Yeah.
What if it just is the way that it is?
Mm.
Um, I went to this forever ago when I was traveling. I went to the Tate in London, and there was this photo exhibit of, it was a photographer named Wolfgang Tillmans, this German. I don't remember names for some reason. This is like emblazoned in my memory.
Me too.
And it was just all these big white rooms with photographs, like little photographs just stuck to the walls. And it was this
Wow.
like
Yeah.
crazy mess of ordinary moments. And it was called "If One Thing Matters, Everything Matters. If
Wow.
Everything Matters, One Thing Matters." And I was
So,
like, well, isn't that just the grand theme of life?
yeah. Oh my
Like,
God.
we want to hold on to it so much with all this
Yeah.
weight of meaning, and we need to let go of it.
Yeah.
And is
That's
that not
amazing.
the paradox of how to be
Yeah.
here right now?
So perfect. Because it makes you realize that every little thing is justified in having our attention.
Mm.
And yet, like nothing more than anything else, really. That it reminds me of I don't know if you've heard of A Course in Miracles. It's
Mm-hmm.
like and in that it talks about miracles, and one of the main things with miracles is that they don't have like a scale of value, that they are all equally valuable. So there's no better or more powerful or less powerful miracle. And a miracle is an expression of love. Any expression of love is a miracle. And so it's like, it's a bit like that, like that we create all of these scales of, like value judgment on everything. And it actually doesn't, if we could see that it doesn't exist, how much would that change everything? It's crazy when you think about it. Because we think of having some friends that are closer than others, and some people that we love more than others, and things that are more or less important to us. But all of that, if you think of all of that as an illusion, it's a bit wild. Like what you're left with is just,
Mm.
like you say with the photographs, it's just like this kind of potential, like 100% potential in everything, which is pretty amazing.
Well, and I think that like a lot of what I'm feeling in what I want to work with and where I want to take people, if I am still working with people, like this is a
Yeah.
question that I feel toward. I have to do something at some point.
Mm.
But
Maybe, maybe not.
it is not yet here. Um, but I think it's to do with sensory gating and the things that we know but we don't see, or
Mm.
that we realize but we are too busy living in the ego or the monkey mind or the dominant cultural paradigm
Mm.
or whatever we want to call it, to be able to let it in. And it's, as you say, like, what if the pussy willows that are currently out on the willow trees that literally like beckon me every time I see them, they're
Mm.
like, come here, we're
Yeah.
the sirens on the rocks, like we want to bewitch you. And I'm like, oh no, 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 I don't have time.
Yeah. Oh my
And
God,
like,
I
what
know.
if the miracle that day that I am missing is just
Ah,
that?
yeah.
um and what, and how do we unschool ourselves out of this dominant paradigm of mind?
Mm.
I think is by a million small noticing
Yeah.
and a million ordinary photographs taped to the wall and a million moments where we don't know what happens, like how you're stepping into the space with the horses, like, this is a dance and I don't know who's leading,
Mm.
or does there need to be a leader? The whole, does it need to go anywhere?
And I think we need to trust that it's like every time we even notice these things that we're noticing, we are already different. Like not different in terms of that we've let another layer of the conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
So like not really different, but more remembering who we are. And so it's like it's inevitable. I think we have to remember that it is inevitable that we return to like truth and that what I would call the divine, like God, like our nature, which isn't really even in a body at all. So and I think because I think we think we've got that, like often in the whole world of spiritual seeking. I really don't like that word because it's like seeking and saying that you're missing something, you
Yeah.
know. But in that world, I think there's this kind of just constant, you know, looking for something outside of ourselves, and like not realizing that we're already there, and that 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 it isn't there isn't a doubt. You know, there isn't a doubt that what is true is true, and that we will get to that. We will, you know, we will remember fully. Because I think there's this kind of habit of thinking it's simple, like being enlightened, for example. If you use that word, like nobody's ever, you know, it's only like 2 or 3
I
people who
try not
ever
to use that word, but it's
been in like,
okay.
you
We
know,
can
but it's
talk
just
about
that,
it.
yeah, it's just this idea that it's so unattainable. And I think that we need to replace that with just that it is inevitable that we will bring all of our darkness to the light. And that, because I think when you think of it as being unattainable, then you kind of lose your some kind of joy or some kind of trust or faith, that, or even like willingness to look at dark that are in us, because it's like it's not worth.
Yeah. Or
But
it
actually
becomes
that,
censored. We
yeah,
can't hold that the
yeah,
food that would grow in that soil if we could have it be part of
yeah, which is, I think, the opposite of what we need to do, because as soon as we're able to sort of just acknowledge our own darkness and give it away, like give it, like I do that quite a lot now. Like if I feel even the tiniest trace of like hatred or whatever in me, and we do that all the time, like, I mean, it's normal to kind of, but it's not big necessarily, it's just a little hint.
yeah.
Then you just go into it and you say, like, I feel this is here. And then you just ask for it to be healed, and you just let it go. But you have to face it. And I think we spend a lot of our time like just pretending that it's not there, and
Well,
like,
and what a
yeah,
brave thing to say with so much gentleness. Like it is there
yeah,
in
yeah,
just like it's there in myself,
yeah.
each
It's
and
so
every one of us.
liberating. Yeah, to do that, because then as soon as you do that, you feel like, I remember one day, slightly different sort of, it wasn't really the hatred, it was more guilt, because I I was doing this thing where I was working in the muck heap, and I uncovered these huge creatures. I know now that they were, the muck beetles, those
Oh
big
yeah.
beetles. But they had these big wings. They were enormous, like that size.
Wow.
And I
Yeah, we don't have
uncovered,
those here, but I've heard about them. They're kind
yeah,
of mythic. Like
but I don't think I've seen them in the field. Like, I don't, anyway, I've seen big beetles, but anyway, these creatures, I went and uncovered a couple of them in the muck, because I was getting this old muck out of, and they were like in the roots of some plant that had grown in.
hmm.
And so I just felt this horrible guilt, like, oh my God, you probably killed them. I mean, they were probably fine. I just covered them back up again. But I don't know where it came from, but it was like ridiculous amount of guilt. And I just sort of said, take this away, like, because I've learned that you can ask, you can ask for things to be healed from you. And then later on in the afternoon, I just noticed this, because then it was like over and I'd forgotten it. And then I just felt this moment of this peace that was just unbelievable, just so profound sense of peace. And I realized it was because of just seeing, like, having a glimpse of the guilt being gone, like that guilt. And I think we carry that. It's quite a big layer over our minds all the time.
Of like all the
And
things we're
just
not supposed to feel or not supposed to let in or
just
supposed to.
blaming ourselves for things and just thinking I'm not good enough. And I mean, maybe that's personal to me, but I don't know.
I
I think
know.
the peace was so profound. It was a physical thing. It wasn't just, it was physical, emotional, spiritual. It's on all levels. And it was like, and I just knew this is what life without guilt is.
Hmm.
And obviously it came, it didn't stay, but it was a little bit, you get a little bit closer to that then. Because there's then another layer of darkness, and.
Well, and I feel like that's maybe a closer way of working with horses as mirrors or guides, or like that old
Mm,
equine guided learning way of like, how do I see myself in you? What
yeah,
happens between us
yeah.
when our eyes meet? And
Mm,
I think that's a lot of what we lose right now in our scrolling on our phones and our focus away from the living
mm,
world of like dung beetles and earthworms and dead birds
yeah.
who smash into the window and all of
Mm,
those like small darknesses that when we take it, like it reveals a layer of ourselves that we otherwise wouldn't see.
mm,
And in other ways as well, like in joy and connection, it's not just the darker, less desirable pieces. It's
yeah,
all of it. It's like the messy chaos of being a
yeah.
creature on a planet that's alive. And
Mm,
the more we come away from those
that's
simple
true.
communions, if we can call them that, the more
Mm,
we lose of like
yeah,
our
that's really
own
interesting.
internal diversities and our own ecosystems of what.
It's almost like what you're saying is like going deeper into being a body
Mhm.
in order to like release yourself from it. So if we just sideline that, all the time on our screens and stuff, we're not really either.
No.
We're not really being physical in order to kind of discover the spirituality of it. Because you have to, I think you do, in order to resolve this being a body, we have to kind of really be it, don't we? Fully.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
And I think a lot in terms of like meeting life. Like, what are we
Mm,
here for? Am I here to create a beautiful online teaching empire? And maybe partially, my ego self would like to think that's part of
yeah.
it, but the rest of me, like the actual parts of me that are incarnated here to be available to life, like we don't get to become ourselves without those encounters. If all I do is sit at a desk,
Mm,
then I feel like it's like you dancing that point of emergence with your herd. It's like I'm not available to be fed by frequency and these noticings when we meet other beings and the horror that arises, the joy and
mm,
all of that, like multiplicity of being alive, just like
yeah.
that's why we're here.
Yeah, exactly.
And how that informs the spirit or
Yeah.
doesn't, but like I think just on a sheer level of physicality of like we're incarnated here for this.
Yeah.
And how do we
I'm
make ourselves available again? And how do we rejoin the conversation?
that's so it. Make ourselves available, yeah. And in a way, I think all those things like social media and the whole screen thing, I think that in a way is what we need because it's going to do what you're saying. It's going to make us make that decision.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I cannot do it anymore. I like can't post
Mm.
thing. I can maybe look at certain things that I like. I like sort of, I like people who've got these amazing relationships with animals. I like look at that for a bit because I find it inspiring or whatever. But like in terms of engaging with myself in it, like my creativity with Facebook or Instagram or whatever, I just can't do that anymore.
Mm.
It's just, I can't do it. I just feel so put off by it. Like I'm totally uninspired by it. And so, and then I've kind of made a few attempts to get back to it like a while back. And so I'm just like, okay, okay, we'll go that way then. Because it's
Yeah.
like, and I think it may be like something about what you're talking about because it has such a profoundly, some kind of effect. And this is just my personal journey with it because I used to enjoy doing that.
Yeah.
And I used to feel like it was very positive and constructive. But I think it became something that just took me out of that interaction that you're talking
Yeah.
with life and
Yeah.
and nature and just the people that are really like living, around me in my life. And so yeah, I just feel like it could resolved itself.
Yeah. I've been thinking about it in a different way lately. Um, because I've actually moved a lot of my teaching online, which
Mm,
sounds impossible from all of the things that we have spoken about so far. But I realized when I closed the physical school that I wanted to be able to reach. I wanted
mm,
to be able to share the things that I'd found with others who are like, I want to teach my neighbors' kids on my horses and I don't know how.
yeah.
Um, and so I thought, like, how do I like make myself part of this human mycelial network? Because it is like, if we are
Mm,
using it for the ultimate
yeah.
good, it is letting us connect our minds on the other side
Yeah.
of the planet, you and I in this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
All
Yeah.
of all of the other people that I've been able to connect with, which has just been scratching the surface. It is so bad. I'm not there. I'm just like
Yeah.
beep, beep, beep.
Yeah.
Um, but how do I then be in service to the larger world that I live in, which is like
Yeah.
my relationship with these horses, the pussy willow catkins on the willow trees, and this
Mm,
regenerative farm that I'm wrapped up
yeah.
in being part of? And how do I take all of what that is giving me and distill it into things that
Mm.
I can give that then help them open those gates of connection in their own place?
I think that will really come to you. Like it will just unfold because you've got such a clear vision of the intention. So like it will crystallize, it can't not. And I think you just know, like you feel what is what feeds that and what kind of limits that. And I think it's just a case of not having to have it yesterday kind of thing, just
I
being
know.
like
Oh
being an
my god.
Aries.
But I should have.
I know, I know. I know
Honey.
it's so funny. I totally get that.
Just
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
But then
Thank you
like
for that reflection.
yeah, because I mean, if you're anything like me, you'll do like all sorts of things that aren't really it, but they kind of teach you something
Yeah.
about it
Yeah.
or what it should be
Yeah.
or what it will be.
Yeah. It's kind of in the finger painting stage right now. Like, well, I'm just
Yeah.
gonna, but it's happening. Things are
Yeah.
happening. So
Yeah. Yeah.
try to let that in a little bit too.
I do think there are really amazing possibilities, but we're also like we're creating that ourselves. Like if you have an intention of reaching people in an authentic way that's not sort of controlled by other forces and
Yeah. Or all
you
the
know
manipulation of marketing and
yeah,
all of that brouhaha.
yeah, and that's not shutting you down, then you will find and you will create, like we can create what it is in the future. We don't have to just say, oh, screens are bad for people. We can make it into something that's powerful and I think we have to remember that we are the ones, we're the creators, we have this sort of ability
Yeah,
to
and behind the
alter.
technology is still human language and the human heart and the human,
Exactly.
like our visionary imagining,
Yeah.
all of the things that make us. I sometimes I fall down the path of being like, oh my gosh, like how are we ever gonna make the changes we need to make, and all of that
Yeah.
very dire pressure we sometimes feel. And I
Mm.
think back, I went to a little beautiful little music festival on a lake in the Kootenai towns close to where I live, and um, this dad held his very young, probably just maybe a year, slightly less than a year, son up like an offering to the stage. And it was dark and the lights were off, and he had these
Yeah.
these big earmuffs on to protect his
Yeah.
ears. And it was just like, this is my,
Wow.
receive this music, like
Yeah.
fill this being with your light. And he, and it
Yeah.
was like one of the most beautiful things, like this, just holding up the next generation to
I mean,
um
that, yeah,
and that
there's
and
so
that's
much.
that's the beautiful thing about humanity. I think we rattle on about all of the ways in which we are not,
Yeah, bad.
and I think we need, I'm just going to leave it there, in which we are not. And I think that we need to remember that
Mm,
we have the capacity for such potential for beauty.
absolutely. And I think that the technology is allowing that to be seen as well on
Yes.
so many. I mean, there's so many amazing relationships people have now with animals that are just fabulous, and you would never really have dreamed of before. People rescuing butterflies and healing their wings and like crazy things, looking
Yeah.
after spiders and
Yeah.
having relationships with jumping
And
spiders and with
sharing it on the
bumblebees.
internet, like having enough
Yeah,
value that this spider has its own
absolutely.
Instagram page.
Yeah. And it's like wonderful. I mean, that is all having a huge effect on our, on our mind, our communal mind.
Yeah.
It's pretty positive. Yeah. I think that the power play in politics and that kind of capitalist ego and all of that, that's just gonna kind of just resolve itself. It's just gonna, just be let go gently over
Well,
time.
and even if it doesn't, it feels to me like there's something underneath it that's growing, that's so much more powerful
Yeah.
and so much
Yeah.
more generative and so much more aligned with actual life.
And it's not, I think we have to remember it's not about quantity. Again, like the miracles, it's about just like, say, the regenerative farming, for example, if you've got 2 or 3 people that are doing that, in a big way and like being heard and making it, that's so powerful. That's so like beyond what, it doesn't have to be the same numbers because it will just go exponentially, just grow and grow.
Yeah. Well, and there's so many beautiful pebbles that have been dropped into the
Exactly.
surface of the water that
Yeah.
are just, and it's
Yeah.
the power in that ripple to actually
Yeah.
change the fabric of everything.
That's what I really love. Like, when I listen to a lot of near death experiences,
Mm.
NDEs, and what I love is when they remind you all that, because they often experience the value of things, like what on the other side as such, like how what we do here has an effect there. And they always say that it's the little acts of kindness have huge ripples. Like they just go out and they just create this ever increasing powerful cycle of love. Whereas like things that we think are so important, like, like becoming a CEO of a company or like making all the money or whatever, that's nothing. That has no effect. That's meaningless. And we always have to remind ourselves of that. The greatest moment of our life might just be the one time that we were kind to someone.
Yeah.
You know,
There's
I think that's
a man named Stephen Jenkinson who does a lot of teaching on death. And one of the questions that he writes of is, have you lived on the give or have you lived on the take?
yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And that's like the big thing that determines whether you feel at peace when you
So
come to the end of
true.
this life or not.
Absolutely.
And I love that question.
Yeah.
Because it holds
It's
all those
so,
little
yeah,
moments and all those little acts.
so true. And I found that that's where I've been like looking at bringing that entirely into my relationship with the horses, like just over the last few years. Like, because even when I thought that I was doing it for the right reasons, I realized it was still wanting to take something for me from the experience, from the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, that's a really powerful one, just to say, what can I give you? Like, even if it's just to leave you alone or to just see you. I think they really love being seen, horses. Like, they
Well,
love
don't
just
we all?
being loved. Yeah, it's so
Like,
true.
is that
Yes,
not the
absolutely. It's
basis
the
of
bottom line.
relationship? It's the thing that we're
Yeah,
all dying for
yeah, it's so
and
true.
craving and wanting.
And we just forget it. We think we need to do more, but just that is so much. Yeah. So it's pretty amazing just to kind of ask yourself, what can I give you? And it's so much more inspiring as well.
Well, and that's, I find how you get a different answer
Mm,
too.
yeah,
It's always a different answer than what you thought going in.
totally. This has been really nice. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I
Do you,
love all the places we've traveled together.
yeah, I know. Do you have anything else that you feel you haven't talked about?
Pretty complete.
Yeah,
This has been a grand journey.
yeah, yeah. I love doing it that way,
That's
just
so good.
spontaneously.
Yeah.
Yeah, a meeting of souls and minds. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
it's just
beautiful. And
like,
then it flows like a true conversation too.
yeah. Well, it would be really nice to do another one at some point in the
Yeah, we
future.
can see where we both are in a little bit,
Yeah,
see what
love an
else we've
update on your
discovered.
journey. Yeah, yeah, and I'm sure it'll be really beautiful what you come to.
Yeah, yours as well. I'm curious to see where the herd leads.
Yes, yeah, we'll see what happens if we come back together to something. Well, thank you very much, Kira.
You're so welcome.
Yeah, it's lovely to meet you.